They brought the bulldozer at 6:12 a.m. on a Wednesday. No call. No letter. Just roaring diesel engines and a clipboard with HOA Directive 34B scrawled in pen. By the time I got my slippers on, they'd already crushed half my rose beds and were eyeing the old concrete slab at the back of my property like it owed them rent. I ran out yelling, thinking it was some kind of mistake. Maybe they got the wrong address. The guy in the hard hat just pointed at the directive and shrugged. Said they were authorized to remove unauthorized landscaping fixtures. I told him that slab wasn't a fixture, it was the lid of a tunnel. A sealed access point. A military structure. He laughed. You bury a time capsule or something? Then the jackhammer hit steel. A hollow boom cracked the ground. Dust and rust flew up like an angry ghost. The lid collapsed into the earth, revealing a set of stairs descending into darkness. That's when the gas hissed out, harmless, non-lethal, but dramatic enough to make everyone backpedal. And just visible beneath the grit was a plaque. Bolted in. Still legible after decades. Property of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Defense Node Number 7. Federal access permitted only. The contractor turned pale. Called someone? Then someone else showed up, a woman in business heels, fake tan, and a hairstyle that hadn't evolved since the 80s. Linda Garrow. HOA President. Supreme ruler of shrub height and fence color. She gave me that tight HOA smile. The kind that says, I respect you, while already thinking about where your body would fit in the foundation. We've had complaints about unpermitted structures, she said, hands clasped in front of her blazer. You didn't respond to our letter. I told her there was no letter. She said, it was placed in your mailbox. I asked which one, because I have two, one for the HOA and one for real-world correspondence. She didn't answer. I showed her a copy of the deed. Not the house deed, the tunnel deed. Dated 1973. Transferred from the U.S. government to my grandfather as part of a post-deployment civil defense initiative. The HOA didn't even exist until 1991. She waved it off. We have jurisdiction over all non-conforming land fixtures within the community perimeter. I asked her if she knew the tunnel was still technically federal property. She smiled wider. Our legal counsel reviewed all relevant documentation. Your tunnel doesn't appear on any of our registered plans. That's because your plans are forged, I said. And because you're not looking at federal archives. That didn't go over well. She snapped her fingers, told the contractor to keep going. Finish the job. I stepped in front of the machine. Not a great plan. Fortunately, the operator wasn't insane, he shut it down. And then I called the sheriff. He showed up 45 minutes later, looking as interested in the situation as a man forced to choose between paperwork and donuts. But when I showed him the military tag, the property deed, and a faded letter from the Army Corps referencing post-disaster evacuation logistics, he took a breath and said, I think this is above my pay grade. That's when I called my uncle. Retired colonel. Military historian. The kind of man who still polishes his shoes to yell at Fox News. He faxed me 10 pages from the National Military Archives confirming the tunnel was part of an old civil defense network. Built during the Cold War. One of the few remaining intact nodes in private hands. The HOA? They weren't interested in any of that. The next day, I received a fine in the mail for obstruction of authorized community development. It was $2,100. Linda signed it herself. So I sent a cease and desist letter. Cited 3 federal statutes, included pictures of the plaque, the exploded gas line, and a scan of the deed. They ignored it. A week later, I got a lien notice. That's when I stopped trying to talk. I called in a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I found Kendra Voss, former city prosecutor, current HOA terrorizer, and legal counsel to 3 other homeowners who'd been steamrolled by Garrow's little neighborhood empire. She looked at the documents and smirked. This is gonna be fun. She didn't start with a lawsuit. She started with an injunction. Filed it at 9:01 a.m. on Monday. By noon, the court ordered an immediate halt to all construction or demolition on my property until ownership of the tunnel could be determined. The judge actually wrote, "Given the structure's potential federal designation, this case demands thorough investigation." Linda tried to challenge it. Filed a motion to dismiss the injunction. It was denied. She called me that night. Left a voicemail. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The tunnel is a hazard. The board voted unanimously to remove it." I saved the voicemail. Uploaded it to the cloud. Backed it up in 3 places. Then I poured myself a whiskey and walked down the ruined stairs into the shell of what used to be a sealed world beneath my backyard. The structure was cracked, the doors twisted, but the bones were solid. There were markings on the wall, codes, serials, stamps. The kind of details that made bureaucrats sweat and archivists salivate. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about a tunnel. This was about control. And I was about to take it back. Kendra didn't waste time. Within 2 days, she had files from 3 separate HOA cases, all different neighborhoods, all the same patterns. Bulldozed gardens, condemned additions, and community compliance actions that mysteriously aligned with properties that refused to vote Garrow's way in board elections. Most homeowners backed off. Threat of liens, fines, public shaming, it worked. Until now. The first thing Kendra did was dig into the HOA's land records. What she found was a tangle of retroactive permits, suspicious amendments, and adjusted perimeter maps that quietly folded several adjacent plots into HOA control, plots that had never signed into the agreement. Mine was one of them. According to the 2005 revised community map filed with the county, my property had been included in a universal maintenance overlay. That sounded innocuous until Kendra matched it with an annexation request the HOA filed that same year, one denied by the county and rejected by the state. Somehow, their map got updated anyway. Somehow, the county clerk never caught it. Sloppy, Kendra said. But intentional. She sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the Army Corps, asking for all documents related to the tunnel's deeding, inspection records, and structural assessments. While that processed, we visited the county archives in person. And that's where we found it. A notarized deed transfer from 1973, signed by Colonel Matthew G. Harlan, Army Corps of Engineers, transferring node number 7 to James H. Lorne, private citizen. My grandfather. Attached was a map with exact GPS coordinates. The tunnel's dimensions. And a clause that read, "This structure is designated as exempt from civilian development, demolition, or repurposing unless reviewed and approved by the U.S. Department of Defense." The HOA had torn it down with a local permit and a generic notice of landscaping noncompliance. That wasn't just a mistake. That was criminal negligence. Kendra filed a motion to compel discovery. She demanded the HOA produce original architectural surveys, land maps, board vote records, and any permits related to my property. Garrow's lawyers tried to delay it. Claimed the tunnel wasn't part of the house. Said it was abandoned infrastructure. Argued that by failing to disclose its presence on the HOA's sign-up paperwork, I had voided its protections. Kendra responded by slamming them with a copy of the deed, military exemption clause, and a 10-page memo arguing that a structure granted exemption from all civilian development couldn't be voided by an HOA that didn't exist when it was deeded. She cited federal case law from 1994 where a similar Cold War shelter was ruled untouchable by municipal authorities. Their tone changed. The next morning, Garrow's office issued a press release calling the tunnel a potential hazard from a bygone era, and cited community safety as their primary concern. Kendra was delighted. They're retreating to optics. That's a weak spot. We found more. A whistleblower, Diane Rowell, former HOA secretary, reached out. She'd heard about the case and wanted to talk. Said she'd resigned 2 years ago after Garrow forced her to backdate a community vote to approve several property inclusions, mine among them. Diane had copies. Original, unaltered records. No vote had ever taken place. The HOA board had amended the map in private, then fabricated documents to show community approval. I didn't want to be part of it, she said. But I didn't have the stomach for a legal fight. I figured someone else would catch it. But they never did. We gave Diane immunity in writing and added her affidavit to our case file. Then the FOIA results came in. The Army Corps still considered the tunnel active. It had been inspected in 2019 as part of a Cold War infrastructure audit. The report noted structural integrity at 88%, minor corrosion on upper supports, and no current hazards. Final recommendation: maintain as is. Do not destroy without federal review. They had documentation showing they sent a notice to the HOA years ago, informing them of the tunnel's classification. Garrow had received it, signed for it, filed it under non-actionable, and buried it in a folder marked Legacy Liabilities. Kendra almost laughed when she saw that. They're cooked, she said. They just don't know how bad yet. We filed the lawsuit the next day. Unlawful destruction of federally protected infrastructure. Fraudulent land annexation. Negligent endangerment. Intentional falsification of public records. It hit the news within hours. Local media ran with the angle. Veteran's family fights HOA over secret Cold War tunnel. My face wasn't on camera, but my voice was. I kept it measured, factual. Let Kendra do the heavy lifting on air. She was good at it. Razor sharp with a smile, like a scalpel in lipstick. Public opinion turned fast. People started digging up their own HOA nightmares, bulldozed patios, threatened evictions over mailbox colors, $1,000 fines for unapproved garden gnomes. Garrow tried to fight back with a smear campaign, called me uncooperative, belligerent, even unpatriotic, for refusing to follow community code. But when the Army Corps released a public statement confirming the tunnel's military heritage and active exemption, her narrative collapsed. We got a hearing date. 2 weeks out. The night before, someone threw a rock through my window. No note, no warning. Just shattered glass and silence. I filed a report. Sheriff said he'd look into it. I wasn't worried. I was focused. I walked the tunnel ruins again, flashlight in hand, scanning the scorched walls, the snapped cables, the still visible emergency signage. I thought about the engineers who built it, the soldiers who tested it, the history buried under suburbia and forgotten by time. This wasn't just property. This was proof. Of abuse, of arrogance, of power gone stale and unchecked. And I was going to bury their case the way they tried to bury my family's past. Court was scheduled for 9 a.m., but by 8:15 the benches were full. Retired vets, pissed off homeowners, local reporters. It wasn't just about the tunnel anymore. It was about what the HOA had become, an unelected regime hiding behind fine print and bylaws. Linda Garrow walked in like a politician heading to a press conference. Blazer tight, pearls too perfect, expression neutral. Her legal team, 3 suited lawyers from a firm downtown, looked bored, like they expected this to be over in an hour. Kendra didn't blink. She was already unzipping her briefcase. The judge, Honorable Marla Chin, didn't waste time. She asked both sides to summarize their positions. Garrow's lead attorney started with the same hollow routine. The tunnel was not disclosed, not on modern records, not safe. He framed it as an issue of community safety. Accused me of deliberately concealing an obsolete, hazardous structure, and finished with a suggestion that the HOA had the right, even the duty, to act. Kendra stood and smiled. She didn't even look at her notes. The tunnel was registered federally. The HOA received a notice in 2019 and ignored it. They destroyed a structure classified as exempt under National Civil Defense Code. They then filed fraudulent annexation records to justify it. That's not safety. That's a cover-up. Judge Chen nodded. Proceed. Kendra called the first witness, a retired Army engineer who'd participated in the 2019 audit. He confirmed the structure was stable, sealed, and still classified as part of the Civil Defense Infrastructure Archive. He explained, in technical but clear terms, that the HOA had zero authority to touch it. Garrow's team tried to discredit him, but he stood firm. "You can't override a federal classification with a landscaping violation," he said. "That's not how law works." Next came Diane, the whistleblower. Her voice shook at first, but Kendra walked her through it. She testified to forged meeting minutes, backdated votes, and Garrow's personal directive to annex my property quietly. The court fell silent when she said, "She told me nobody would ever dig that deep, and if they did, we'd settle quietly." Kendra entered the signed immunity deal into evidence, along with the original records. Garrow's lawyer objected. Judge Chin overruled. "You'll have your turn," she said flatly. Then came the county clerk, called by us, subpoenaed for comment. He admitted the HOA's annexation map had been filed incorrectly but approved by mistake. "It was presented as a minor revision," he said. "We trusted them." Kendra pounced. "You trusted them. Did you verify?" "No," he said, quiet. Kendra gave the jury a moment to absorb that. Then she laid out the timeline. The tunnel deeded in 1973, HOA formed in 1991, attempted annexation in 2005, rejected officially, then refiled quietly in 2006 using different language. She held up both documents, one stamp denied, the other suspiciously missing any stamp at all. "They filed an illegal annexation," she said. "They forged compliance records. They ignored federal documentation. And when confronted, they fined the victim and threatened liens." Garrow took the stand last. She was confident at first, hitting every buzzword. Community wellness. Compliance. Safety concerns. Cooperative efforts. But when Kendra started cross-examining, it unraveled fast. "Did you receive this letter from the Army Corps in 2019? Kendra held it up. Garrow looked at it. "I don't recall. It was signed for under your name. I signed many documents. Is this your signature?" Garrow paused. "It appears to be. Did you read the contents?" "I don't remember." "You received a federal warning that the structure was not under your jurisdiction, and you ignored it. I didn't believe it was relevant. Are you a legal authority on federal property rights?" "I am the elected president of the HOA." "That's not an answer." The judge didn't stop her. Neither did the jury. Then came the kicker. Kendra played the voicemail, Garrow telling me I was making this harder than it needs to be, confirming the demolition was ordered after she saw the deed. That voicemail echoed through the courtroom like a nail in a coffin. The HOA's lawyer tried damage control during redirect, but it was too late. Garrow had perjured herself. Claimed she wasn't aware of the federal claim, then heard, in her own voice, acknowledging it. Closing arguments were sharp. Garrow's team leaned on fear, unregistered structures, neighborhood safety, community responsibility. But they sounded weak. Defensive. Like they knew they were bleeding and just trying to hold the line. Kendra didn't even look at her papers during her final words. "This case isn't about a tunnel. It's about power. A private group overstepping, manipulating records, and ignoring the law because they thought they'd never be challenged. My client lost a piece of his family's history. A federal structure. And the HOA tried to fine him for objecting." She let it hang. "If they get away with this, what's next?" Judge Chin recessed for deliberation. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps. We said nothing. Kendra held her poker face. I kept my mouth shut. We just waited. An hour later, we were called back in. Judge Chin read the verdict herself. The HOA was found liable on all counts. Unlawful destruction of protected property. Fraudulent annexation. Falsification of records. Damages to be awarded in full, including reconstruction costs, punitive fines, and legal fees. There was a gasp. Garrow sat frozen. Her lawyers whispered frantically, but it didn't matter. Kendra turned to me and said, "That right there? That's precedent." And for the first time since this started, I let myself breathe. The next morning, Garrow resigned. Not with dignity, not with grace, just a tersely worded email to the board citing health reasons and media harassment. By noon, it was leaked. By 2, the HOA's website was offline. The board scheduled an emergency meeting to elect a new interim president. Diane was voted in unanimously. No one else wanted the job. The tunnel reconstruction began 3 weeks later. Not because I asked, but because the court ordered it. Full restoration. Same materials, same dimensions. Anything that couldn't be replicated had to be upgraded, at the HOA's expense. The contractor this time wasn't from the HOA's friends list. He was federal. Army Corps oversight. I made coffee for the crew every morning, just to watch the irony settle in. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years started showing up. Some just to gawk. Others to say thank you. More than one whispered stories. Fines they couldn't fight, pressure they couldn't prove, rules that changed whenever Garrow wanted them to. For years, no one stood up. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't think it mattered. Now they knew it did. Kendra became a local legend. She picked up 2 new clients the same week the verdict went public, both cases involving HOA intimidation. She didn't even charge me for the last week of hours. Called it a victory bonus. She said cases like this were rare. Not because the laws didn't exist, but because people gave up before they found them. The federal agency released a formal statement. They confirmed the tunnel was never delisted from civil defense infrastructure and should have been protected. They didn't indict Garrow, but they opened an investigation into the HOA's past filings. There was talk of oversight legislation, forcing HOAs to register all enforcement actions with a municipal body. Nothing solid yet, but the noise was growing. I got offers, from podcasts, YouTube channels, even a cable network wanting a docuseries on neighborhood tyranny. I declined them all. This wasn't a circus. It was my land, my family's history, and a damn tunnel we'd kept quiet for 5 decades because it wasn't meant to be paraded. It was meant to be respected. The lien was dropped. The fines erased. The apology, of course, never came. But that was fine. I didn't need it. What I had instead was better. The new HOA board sent out their first community letter under Diane's leadership. It was brief, transparent, bullet-pointed. Included the line, "This HOA will no longer act without full community review and certified documentation." Bolded, underlined, signed by every current member. The neighborhood started changing after that. Not fast, not dramatically. But you could feel it. People were less afraid to ask questions. To say no. A few even brought chairs to the next board meeting just to watch the process. And me? I got my tunnel back. Steel reinforced. New hatch. Updated seal. Still quiet. Still hidden. But this time, documented in every public record imaginable. No one would ever mistake it for unauthorized landscaping again. I walked it once, alone. Down the stairs. Through the newly repaired blast doors. Past the junction where the control room once stood. Dust hadn't settled yet. Smelled like concrete and paint. But it was clean. Whole. On the far wall, I hung the deed in a frame. Below it, the 2019 inspection report. And next to that, a printout of the judgment order. 3 pieces of paper that told the whole story, without shouting, without begging. Just existing. Documented truth. Sometimes power doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like silence returned. Control regained. A thing no one can take from you because now the law says so. I never spoke to Garrow again. Heard she moved to a different state. Some whispered she was fighting a lawsuit there too, something about financial misreporting in a development fund. I didn't care. She could rot under her next perimeter enforcement policy. For all I was concerned. The real win wasn't just my land. It was proving they couldn't just rewrite the rules and expect the world to roll over. It was showing every person who's ever had their garden ripped up or mailbox repainted against their will that if you dig deep enough, beneath the bylaws, beneath the threats, beneath the arrogance, you'll find something stronger than a tunnel. you'll find the truth. And if you're willing to fight for it, they'll never bulldoze you again. I left the hatch unlocked that night, just for a moment. Sat at the top of the stairs, watching the stars. The world was quiet. The kind of quiet you earn. They called it a hole in the ground. I called it home. And now, thanks to a little law, a lot of grit, and one hell of a lawyer, nobody would ever mistake it for anything else again.